Crucial talks are taking place this lunchtime on the future of Tata Steel in the UK. With thousands of jobs at stake, the deal will look at investment and at workers' pensions.
We need to have some sustainability and some confidence in the future, both for the workforce and the local economy.
We'll bring you the latest from our correspondent at the main Tata Steel works in Port Talbot. Also this lunchtime, more than 1 in 10 patients in England face long delays for a hospital bed after being admitted to A&E. A leading charity says poverty amongst families in work is on the rise, partly because of the high cost of rented housing. Keep all birds and poultry indoors, warns the chief vet, to protect them from a highly infectious strain of avian flu. And bye-bye Illustrious, Britain's last operational aircraft carrier, sets sail for her final voyage.
In the south, the crowds are out on the seafront in Portsmouth to say goodbye to HMSIllustrious. And tightening up the law, an Oxfordshire school campaigns for compulsory seatbelts in school buses.
Good afternoon and welcome to the BBC News at 1. Crucial talks on the future of Tata Steel in the UK are taking place this lunchtime. Union leaders are meeting to discuss a potential new deal. Thousands of jobs have been in the balance since March, when Tata put the British end of its business up for sale. The unions are calling for guarantees on jobs and pensions, but a deal could depend on changes to workers' pensions. Well, let's go over to Port Talbot and to our correspondent Daniel Davis for the latest. Daniel.
Rita, about 50 trade union officials have been meeting here today to discuss an agreement with Tata. It's likely that the deal would involve compromises, but the prize on offer is a commitment to keep making steel here at Port Talbot and at other Tata sites, employing thousands of people elsewhere in Wales and England. Shrouded in uncertainty for months. But could the gloom be lifting from Britain's biggest steelworks? More than 4,000 people work here. Another 4,000 Tata staff throughout the UK will also be affected. The company's pension scheme deterred potential buyers after Tata put its UK steel operation up for sale in March. At the heart of this steelworks are 2 huge blast furnaces. And if there's to be any compromise on pensions, unions want a long-term commitment to keep both of those furnaces burning.
Well, I worked here for 44 years. My father was here before me.
It's been an anxious year, says this retired steelworker.
I think that it's got to be looked at carefully. It's got to be considered. But we need to be sure that there's going to be a long term. So we need guarantees of Tata today that they're here for the long run, not for the short term. We don't be back here this year or next year looking again at where we're going. We need to have some sustainability and some confidence in the future, both for the workforce and the local economy.
It's not just the company's employees that rely on steel for their livelihoods in Port Talbot, but the whole town.
Everybody's been sitting on a rope waiting to find out what's happening, really. You know, but don't know what's happening. It's gone quiet this last couple of months. People are too frightened to spend any money. And
workers hope things have improved since the depths of the steel crisis, when Tata was said to be losing huge sums.
It is a massive concern. I've been here 17 years, I've put a lot into it, but saying just have to wait and see, really. I think we'll probably have to have a vote on it anyway, so we'll see when that comes about.
The recent fall in the value of the pound has helped make this business more competitive, say experts.
Steel prices are firm. That's another factor that's helping them back to profitability. But above all, there's been a massive boardroom bust-up back in Tata Sons in India.
At one stage, they feared the worst for jobs here and much of Britain's steel industry. Now there's some hope of a brighter future. Well, discussions have been going on through the morning. We're still waiting for an announcement on the nature of this deal, whether it'll be put to workers in a vote. If it is, it's unlikely to be the end of the road, but it does mark quite a dramatic turnaround from the spring when Tata put its UK steelmaking operations up for sale. And at that point, it looked for all the world like Tata wanted a quick sale. Rita.
Daniel, thank you. There's more evidence today of the growing pressure on the accident and emergency system in the NHS in England. This year, nearly 500,000 patients had to wait for more than 4 hours for a bed on a ward, despite being taken to hospital for an emergency. That's a 5-fold increase over the course of 5 years. The NHS has acknowledged the problem, blaming growing demand on the system. Here's our health correspondent, Robert Piggott.
Beautiful calendar.
Yeah. At 92, and after a series of strokes that have left him with dementia, Norman Sykes is among the NHS's frailest patients. In March, after a doctor warned he might not survive the night, Mr Sykes was taken to A&E. Once there, he had to wait 5 hours to be admitted to a ward.
I was shocked to find out that he had to wait in a corridor. I was further exasperated that once he was in A&E, it then took another 5 hours before they were able to find a bed and admit him properly.
Mr Sykes' experience has become increasingly common. In 2010 to 11, fewer than 100,000 people were kept on trolleys or temporary beds for longer than the NHS's 4-hour maximum. By 2015 to 16, it was more than 470,000, although that number was slightly inflated by a new way of calculating the figures. Patients on so-called trolley waits are a symptom of a deeper problem. For safety and efficiency, hospitals should have no more than 85% of their beds occupied. But almost 3/4 of England's hospital trusts have exceeded that figure.
Hospitals are doing their level best to ensure patients can flow through the hospital system as they need to. But when you're running your hospitals with over 90% of beds full at any one time, it's becoming increasingly hard to do, and that's worrying as we head into winter.
Winter will bring increased demand on hospitals, which doctors say are already dangerously full.
We already estimate that we have 3,000 deaths a year caused by trolley waits in the UK. We have many more patients over the 85 now. We also have less social care. We have fewer beds in the UK than any other developed country. So the situation can only really get worse.
NHS England say A&E departments deal with 2.5 million more patients than they did 5 years ago, and the vast majority are admitted quickly. Health Service figures for Scotland, Wales and Northern Ireland aren't directly comparable with England, but they too suggest an increasing shortage of beds. Robert Piggott, BBC News.
The American drugs company Pfizer has been fined a record £84 million for overcharging the NHS for an epilepsy treatment. The cost of the medicine rose by 2,600% after it sold the rights to Flynn Pharma, a privately owned British company. It has been fined more than £5 million. Both companies say they'll appeal. Now, the case for MPs to be consulted before the triggering of Article 50, effectively the starting gun for official Brexit negotiations, is continuing at the Supreme Court this lunchtime. The senior lawyer opposing the government, Lord Pannick QC, said Parliament must be involved in the process because leaving the Union would have such a major impact on UK laws. Here's our political correspondent, Ben Wright.
The legal battle underway here at the Supreme Court is about whether the government can trigger the 2-year process of leaving the EU without getting the green light from Parliament first. The government's lawyers, led by the Attorney General, have argued ministers can make or unmake international treaties using ancient powers called prerogative, and that includes triggering Brexit. But Gina Miller, the lead claimant in the group that won their case at the High Court last month, says only Parliament can take that step. And this morning, her barrister, Lord Pannick, continued to make his argument.
To hold a referendum is a very important matter. My submission is, however, it has nothing whatsoever to do with the issue before the court, which is who enjoys the power to notify. Is there a prerogative power once the referendum has taken place?
Lord Pannick said the Act of Parliament that made the EU referendum possible did not give the government the explicit power to take Britain out of the EU. But the President of the Supreme Court, Lord Newberger, wanted to know about the referendum's legal effect.
Then it seems to me there may be some force in the argument that says when Parliament comes to face up to this issue, they say, well, let the British people vote. It's not decisive, of course, because the government has to decide. But one could say it is Parliament ceding the ground so far as its role is concerned to the people, to a referendum. It's done that. and then it's over to the government.
But the former is, with respect, self-evident, that Parliament is saying that the people are entitled, should be given a voice.
Yes.
Where I would respectfully take issue is the second part of your Lordship's question to me. It doesn't follow, in my submission, that the people having spoken, they are advising the government as opposed to Parliament.
Dominic Chambers QC then argued that only Parliament could take away rights that Parliament had granted.
By triggering Article 50, EU law rights will undoubtedly and inevitably be lost.
The Supreme Court case is being watched closely in Scotland too. Later today, the Scottish Government's top law officer, the Lord Advocate, will argue Holyrood needs to give its consent before the UK begins its exit from the EU. Yesterday, the UK Government insisted the devolved administrations had no powers over foreign affairs. MPs are debating the government's Brexit strategy today, but the Supreme Court case is so important because if the government loses, then ministers will have to get a bill through Parliament. And that will give MPs the chance to force the government to spell out much more clearly what their plan for leaving the European Union will be before they allow Brexit to begin. Ben Wright, BBC News, Westminster.
Well, as Ben mentioned there, MPs have begun that debate, triggered by Labour, demanding that the government publish a pretty detailed plan about how Britain is going to leave the EU before Article 50 is triggered. For its part, the government has said it is prepared to do so in return for Labour backing its timetable. Well, let's talk now to our assistant political editor, Norman Smith, who's in Westminster for us, as ever. Norman, what is the significance of this debate and this vote?
Well, Rita, on the face of it, you would say this is a significant climb down by Mrs May because to date she's resolutely refused to put down in black and white what her plans for Brexit are, warning that that might compromise her negotiating strategy. Now she says, yes, I will produce a Brexit plan. The trouble is no one really knows what a plan is, how much detail it might have in it, because a plan could be anything from a few pointers on a post-it all the way up to a full-blooded blueprint for Brexit. Now, it won't be that. More likely it'll be a beefed-up restatement of many of Mrs May's existing observations about Brexit. Namely, she wants to get the best sort of access she can to the single market. She wants control over immigration. She wants to negotiate new free trade deals with other countries around the world. So it may not contain answers to critical questions about the single market, whether we keep paying into the EU, will there be a transitional deal? Also, because Mrs May doesn't have to produce it until March, well, by March, we may already know a lot more about Mrs May's negotiating strategy, which means it could also be, well, a bit out of date, which is why Labour are now saying that unless Mrs May's plan is detailed, they could press for a full government white paper on Brexit, and they want the plan produced in January, so MPs have got plenty of time to look at it before Article 50 is triggered, which means we get a plan, but the row over the plan, that's far from over.
OK, Norman, many thanks. Norman Smith there. Syrian activists say government forces have retaken control of all of Aleppo's historic old town. A human rights group said the rebels pulled out of the area after days of heavy fighting. The government now controls at least 2/3 of the territory once held by militants. Tens of thousands of civilians are still trapped in the opposition enclave. The number of people who are working but in poverty has hit a record high. A study by the Joseph Rowntree Foundation found there are an estimated 3.8 million workers classified as poor, meaning living on less than 60% of average income. The charity is now calling on ministers to reverse planned cuts to benefits. The government says it's promoting work over welfare. Here's our economics correspondent, Andy Verity.
In Port Glasgow, on the mouth of the Clyde River, it's not a shortage of work that's making more people poor, it's incomes that haven't kept up.
I get 12,000, maybe 12,500 a year. My partner's about 7,500 a year. And it's topped up by benefits, and it's total yearly is £22,500.
Father of three, Mark Payne and his wife work, but they're among a growing number of people, 7.4 million, who are in poverty in spite of working. Their incomes are low enough to be topped up by the taxpayer, and under planned cuts under the new universal credit, those top-ups themselves will be slashed.
This bill wakes up and your head's basically above, just above water, no more. But if we get put on the universal tax credits, then we'll sink.
While unemployment's dropped and the economy's grown in the past 6 years, the housing shortage has driven up rents, which have gone up faster than wages in Leicester as in other towns.
The promise we've been given, I think, generation after generation, if you work hard, you will have a decent life. And I think that promise is which is broken, because no longer people who work hard are having access to that decent life which was promised to us.
Pensioners now have higher incomes on average than they've ever had, as the state pension's gone up much faster than inflation. Families of working age are more likely to be poor, and working age benefits are frozen. By 2020, families claiming top-ups or other benefits will be £7 billion worse off.
Low-income families spend a lot more of their money on essentials, so they spend £1 in £6 of their incomes on food, for instance. That's double what better-off families are spending on food. So the products that rise most in price, fuel, food, are bought by low-income families, and it's very hard to cut back. If you're already trying to stretch just to feed the family and heat your home, you haven't got much room for manoeuvre.
Because it looked at poverty after housing costs, the Joseph Rowntree Foundation found the highest rate of poverty hidden in a seemingly prosperous place where the housing costs bite hardest. Not Glasgow, not Leicester, London. Andy Verity, BBC News.
The time is 16 minutes past 1. Our top story this lunchtime. Crucial talks are taking place this lunchtime on the future of Tata Steel in the UK. And still to come, farewell HMSIllustrious. The Royal Navy's aircraft carrier sets sail on her final voyage.
Coming up in South today at 1:30, tightening up the law. An Oxfordshire school campaigns for compulsory seatbelts in school buses. And they've got it down to a T, the award-winning couple behind the Disabled Golf Club.
Now, anyone who keeps poultry or birds has been told to keep them indoors to prevent the spread of avian flu after the disease was found in dead wild birds in countries across Europe. The disease hasn't spread to the UK, but the government's chief vet says owners must do everything they can to stop contact between their animals and wild birds. Well, let's speak now to our rural affairs correspondent Claire Marshall, who's at a turkey farm near Chelmsford in Essex. Claire.
Thank you, Rita. This is a free-range farm, and the turkeys should be out here and in the fields and in the woods, in the open air. But since the chief vet announced the creation of this protection zone yesterday afternoon, they were rushed in here to this shed where they can be safe. Now, this is for their own protection. The same stringent measures have now just been announced that they'll be taking place in Wales and also in Scotland.
This highly infectious strain of bird flu, not considered harmful to humans, is spreading quickly across Europe. These pictures are from a geese farm in Poland on Sunday. Cordoned off by police, officials had to put on protective clothing to dispose of hundreds of carcasses. And this was the cordon thrown up around a duck farm in southwestern France last week. 2,000 birds died from the virus and thousands more had to be culled. As a result, keepers across the country are bringing in their poultry, even free-range ones, like this turkey farm near Chelmsford.
There are 6,500 birds in this shed. They were out in the fields, but when the order came through, they were brought inside. So now they're safe from any potential infection from wild birds.
I don't lose sleep anymore because you kind of get used to it, but October, November are really, not traumatic months, but you're really, really worried because it can happen at any time. And it's not if there's going to be an outbreak. Of course, I'm sure there will be an outbreak in the future. It's when it's going to happen, and you just hope it's not going to happen too close to Christmas, and you're sure as hoping it's not going to happen too close to your farm or on one of our farms. It's very worrying.
This precautionary measure applies to farmers and anyone who keeps any birds, even those with a few chickens in their back garden.
We really don't want to have any outbreaks at all. Our history, though, is our farmers are good at spotting disease. We encourage them to do that. And we have a history of limiting that to generally only one outbreak. What we're trying to do now is stop that happening at all, but that doesn't affect the food supply. Our big effort is to reduce that, limit that effect and limit the numbers affected, and ideally not have any effect at all.
No cases of H5N8 have been found in the UK yet, and Public Health England advises that the threat to human health is very low. However, farmers are being asked to look for signs of infection and to take robust disinfectant measures. Christmas is only a few weeks away. This couldn't come at a more critical time of the year for farmers.
And European farmers are already suffering. In Germany, they've already had to cull 16,000 turkeys at different sites across the country. So it is a real threat here. Some farmers have been telling me, and members of the NFU, that perhaps these measures, although they are very stringent, should have been put in place a few weeks ago.
Claire, thanks very much. Claire Marshall there. A powerful earthquake has struck the Aceh region of Indonesia. Over 90 people are known to have died, and that figure is expected to rise in the coming hours as rescue workers clear the rubble away from destroyed buildings. The earthquake happened in the same area that was devastated in the Boxing Day tsunami of 2004. Daniel Bircher reports.
Desperate attempts to find more survivors. Here in Maradu, one of the towns that has been hardest hit, rescue crews are still sifting through the rubble. Many of those who were killed and injured in this earthquake were crushed by collapsing buildings. Where there are no mechanical diggers, they are working by hand. More than 1,000 soldiers and almost as many police have been sent to the worst affected areas. Residents, frightened of aftershocks, are staying away from their homes. A spokesman for the National Disaster Management Agency said they expected the number of casualties to continue to rise and that a state of emergency had been declared in the province. The quake hit Indonesia's Aceh province, which lies in the north of Sumatra Island. It struck early in the morning as many in the mainly Muslim region were preparing for prayers. A number of mosques have collapsed, as have hundreds of shops and houses. In some areas there is no electricity and basic supplies, including food and water, are already running short. The General Hospital in PD Jaya was quickly overwhelmed and many people are being treated in tents that have been pitched on its grounds. The Indonesian Red Cross has sent emergency response teams. This man was with his wife, who was injured in the quake. They have no news of their children, who were staying at a boarding school. The region is prone to earthquakes, and Aceh province was one of those worst hit in the tsunami that struck in 2004, killing more than 170,000 people in Indonesia alone. Memories of that sent many looking for higher ground, but authorities now say there is no risk of a tsunami following this quake. Daniel Bircher, BBC News.
New powers are to come into force in England and Wales to help protect people from being stalked by strangers. Court orders would stop stalkers from approaching their victims or sending them messages. Breaking the order could mean imprisonment. Here's our Home Affairs correspondent, Danny Shaw.
This is stalking at its worst. Threatening graffiti, car tyres slashed, windows broken at home. In this case, the victim was Helen Pearson from Devon. She was left with face, neck and back injuries after her stalker stabbed her with scissors. It was the culmination of a 5-year campaign of intimidation and abuse by Joseph Willis. He's now serving a jail term for attempted murder.
I never feel free of it. I try to pretend like to the outside world that I am and I'm moving on and things, but it doesn't leave you and things don't seem innocent anymore.
Hi, Suki.
Now there's to be greater legal support for victims of stalking, especially those targeted by strangers and acquaintances. The Home Secretary, on a visit to the National Stalking Helpline, has announced a new court order to ensure stalkers stay away from the person they're targeting, even if they haven't been arrested or convicted.
An example might be stopping them hanging around outside the house. An example might be if they're being cyber stalked, it might be not having access to their computer. It's having a different remedy for a different type of stalking.
Stalking protection orders will be adapted according to each case. Police will be able to apply to the courts for an order. Treatment for mental health problems might be a requirement, with a 5-year prison sentence the maximum punishment for anyone who breaches the terms of a stalking protection order.
There's actually some really concerning behaviours that
But experts say police need to do more to spot the signs of stalking.
Maybe the stalking has not been identified as such and is being categorised as harassment, or it's simply not being acknowledged that whereas you may be looking at a lot of individual incidents, that actually a pattern of behaviour is what's underlying, and that's what makes it stalking.
The aim is to stop more people like Helen Pearson falling victim to stalkers, to stop the obsessions of stalkers spiralling out of control. Danny Shaw, BBC News.
People with a disability are far less likely to be in work than the general population. But a government promise to do more to get them into work could take almost 50 years to be fulfilled, according to a group of MPs. Here's our disability correspondent, Nikki Fox.
Hello. June's hard at work helping others find a job. She knows only too well how difficult it can be to find employment.
I've had 3 years where I couldn't find a job, and even if you do get a job, it's trying to convince them that your needs aren't going to be difficult for them to meet.
Today's report looks at why so few disabled people are in work and why it will take nearly 50 years to fulfil a manifesto pledge set before last year's election. It says current government schemes are failing to create new jobs and there needs to be more pressure on the private sector.
What we're asking the government to do is to take the leap from changing the welfare system to make it easier to get more people into work, and taking a really bold step, like perhaps making sure every company or private sector company that takes government money, to make them open up every single employment stream to disabled people, to make sure that they are practicing excellent disability rights.
Despite having plenty of qualifications between them, no one in this group has a job.
I applied for roughly 30 places. I was really excited. Hopefully something would come along, but nothing did.
Government wants disabled people back in work. Well, this is important.
The government says it has got almost 600,000 more disabled people in work over the past 3 years, but admits much more needs to be done. Nikki Fox, BBC News.
Now, hundreds of people gathered around Portsmouth Harbour this morning to bid farewell to the aircraft carrier HMSIllustrious, which is on her last journey. She's sailing to a scrapyard in Turkey, where she'll be broken up after 32 years of service. But her departure leaves the Royal Navy without a carrier. Her replacement, HMS Queen Elizabeth, isn't commissioned until next year. Our defence correspondent Jonathan Beale sent this report from Portsmouth.
For the last time, Illustrious left her home at Portsmouth Harbour. This time not under her own power, but pulled by tugs. A sad day for the many crew who'd served on board and who'd now come to bid farewell. From able seamen to captains and even admirals, and wives who'd done this many times before. But today, it was for good.
Yeah, there'll probably be a few tears, no doubt, as she goes off to Davy Jones's locker, if you like.
I think to get rid of these ships earlier than they were planned to go, and particularly to cancel the Harrier force, was strategically a nonsense.
I will probably cry, but actually old ladies deserve to die with dignity, and I believe taking her away, this is the end of her life.
The Harrier jets that once flew off her have long gone. Lusty, as she was affectionately known, has also been gutted. What was once one of the Royal Navy's most powerful warships, now impotent. But even at the end of her life, there's still affection.
Illustrious! Hip, hip! Hooray! Hip, hip! Hooray! Hip, hip! Hooray!
The biggest ship is HMS Illustrious.
Over 30 years, she'd sailed nearly 1 million nautical miles, from the Falklands to the Philippines, projecting British power all over the world. One of her last acts to witness the naming ceremony of the Queen Elizabeth, the first of two much larger carriers that will eventually replace her.
These aircraft carriers will be a central part of British defence now for the next 50 years. They're vital, they're important, they're iconic, they will be totemic, and I think they'll be used pretty heavily.
But the new carrier that replaces Illustrious won't be fully operational until 2020. It'll have been a 10-year gap. Lusty is now following in the wake of her sister ships Ark Royal and Invincible, travelling to the same Turkish scrapyard to be broken up. Certainly not
an illustrious end.
This the fate that awaits her. Like Ark Royal before her, she'll be stripped for scrap metal. A final bid to save her as a maritime museum failed. Only the memories live on. Jonathan Beale, BBC News, Portsmouth.
Time magazine says its Person of the Year for 2016 is Donald Trump. He'll be inaugurated as America's 45th president in January after his victory in the presidential election against all the odds earlier this year. He was one of 11 candidates for the title, which included Nigel Farage and Beyoncé. Let's take a look at the weather now. Here's Stav.
Thank you very much, Rita. Good afternoon to you at home. Well, what a difference a day makes. Here behind me is a frosty steam from the Highlands, and here's a list of temperatures from yesterday morning. -6 in Inverness. Look at the difference this morning. Temperatures are around the mid-teens Celsius, so incredibly mild start to the day. And we've been talking about it for quite a while. This mild air has arrived across our shores and it's been pumping up from the Azores, and it's set to stay very mild for the rest of the week. But it does come with some clouds, some rain, also some strong winds this afternoon across Scotland with gales in the forecast. But there will be a lot of dry weather across England and Wales, plenty of sunshine around. I'll just nudge those temperatures up into the mid-teens Celsius. You really will notice the difference. We do have a weather front across the west that'll be feeding more rain in towards Wales, in towards northwest England, some low cloud mist and murk, and generally cloudy skies across Scotland and Northern Ireland. But given some brightness, those temperatures likely to rise to around 16 or 17 Celsius across the northeast of Scotland, so exceptionally mild, but it will be very windy as well. You can see the tightly packed ice bars across this northern quarter of the country. Severe gales probably as we head on in towards this evening and overnight. Further south, it will be cloudy. Another ripple of rain pushing in towards southwest England, Wales, in towards the Midlands, northern England. Some heavy bursts on that for a while, but through Thursday, it looks like it will eventually clear away, but leave a legacy of cloud, some hill fog, some drizzle for England and Wales. A bit brighter across Scotland, Northern Ireland here, very windy. A little less cold, a little less mild across Scotland, Northern Ireland, but still very mild for England and Wales. Into Friday, then, we've got a big deep area of low pressure out in the Atlantic, and that will continue to influence the weather across the northwest of the UK with regards to the wind. So again, another windy day across the north and the west. Further south, though, drier and brighter once again, with temperatures in the mid-teens Celsius, but outbreaks of rain across this northwest corner. Some of it will be quite heavy and persistent. Now, for the weekend, it looks like it will continue to be quite windy across the north. There will be spells of rain at times, but I think as we head on towards Sunday, a great chance of seeing more widespread sunshine, and it'll be a little bit cooler than it has been of late. Now, across the south on Saturday, we'll have a weather front bringing a lot of cloud, outbreaks of rain, still very mild here, a little bit fresher across the north and still windy, like I mentioned. And then into Sunday, it looks like that rain slow to clear from the south. I think eventually it will do, and we should see some widespread sunshine, a lot of dry weather there. But you'll notice temperatures in single figures, so feeling a little bit cooler. But it's set to stay mild, really, for the foreseeable future.
Thank you very much. Let's take a look at our main story this lunchtime. Crucial talks are taking place on the future of Tata Steel in the UK. Well, that's all from the BBC News at 1, so it's goodbye from me. And on BBC One, we now join the BBC's news teams where you are. Have a good afternoon. Bye-bye.